Welcome to our show, Obsessed, where we talk about cryptids, mythology, folklore, and whatever else we're currently obsessed with. I'm Caitlin Palmer.
And I'm Clay.
And we're
Obsessed.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Obsessed with the Palmers. As you may have noticed, the timeline is a little wonky right now. So I have people asking me about, well, when are you going to do your podcast? Well, we started the podcast a few years ago. So a lot of the previous episodes have been kind of older. This one that you're listening to right now, this delightful treat for your ear holes that is this moment, is current.
Yeah, the time is 11:30 on November 24th, the year of our Lord, 2024.
I had to think about it too. I was like, wait, what day is that? So by the time you listen to it, it'll be like the day before Thanksgiving.
It'll be Wednesday.
So happy Thanksgiving in 2024.
Well, happy early Thanksgiving from the past.
Right.
I guess.
I don't know. I don't know anything about anything anymore. But what I do know, Clay, is that we opened a Redbubble shop for Obsessed with the Palmers.
We did. So you can find some stuff with our logos on it and a couple of things that Caitlin has drawn, both of cryptids and not of cryptids.
There's butts, and there's also a lot of cryptids. And the Christmas Island rat design I'm pretty proud of. And I feel like that would make the perfect gift for the Obsessed with the Palmers fan in your life. Clay, what's the link to our Redbubble account?
I don't think I can just say the link, but it's if you just search for OWTP.
OWTP stands for Obsessed with the Palmers.
Right. You look for that on Redbubble and go to that store and it'll have all of our bullshit.
Yeah, lots of bullshit. And eventually we would like to have a more official store. We don't get to set the prices for Redbubble, so we're sorry.
Yeah, so the way Redbubble does it is, and this is why their shit is so expensive, they charge you, say you want to get a shirt, they charge you for a shirt, and then all the money on top of that is what the artist gets.
Right.
So, say you set, I want 5% of the earnings. It's not 5% of whatever the t-shirt is they're selling. They're selling a t-shirt, and then they charge an extra 5%, and that goes to you. So.
Right. So, we have our percentage as low as possible, because we want y'all to have stuff.
Yeah. So, ours will probably be cheaper than other things.
So, buy
Some things I have it set to 0%, so if you want, some stickers...
Yeah, and you can hang them up at places, just random places in your hometown.
Right, yeah, just anywhere you want.
Because that's what we do, really.
Slap them on the back of people's, bald heads. Yeah.
Yes! And EW Moneybags will personally thank you for each and every purchase.
He will, actually. There's a little setting you can do for Redbubble that, you can have a personalized message. And it is EW Moneybags thanking you for your patronage.
I love it. So today's episode is actually a request.
Right, and it was requested by...
our friend Sarah. I did not get permission to say her full name, so I'll just say Sarah. We love Sarah. Sarah's amazing. Sarah has the most amazing voice. She is Idina Menzel.
Well, if you give out too much, then people will be able to figure out who she is.
Oh, well, I mean, if you've met her, it's kind of obvious. Sarah, you rock. And Sarah wanted Cthulhu. So, Sarah, you're getting Cthulhu.
Spoilers!
Yeah. It's in the name of the episode. They already know.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
This is just the part where we get to talk about shit.
So I do have a quote I'd like to read.
Oh, I love quotes.
And fans of Lovecraft will obviously know where this is from, but it's a good quote for something like this. Of such great powers or beings, there may be conceivably a survival of a hugely remote period when consciousness was manifested. Perhaps in shapes and forms long since withdrawn before the tide of advancing humanity. Forms of which poetry and legend alone have caught a flying memory and called them gods, monsters, mythical beings of all sorts and kind. That was Mr. Blackwood.
Ooh.
But, so we are doing Cthulhu, and part of that is obviously talking about H.P. Lovecraft. Now, I guess a little forewarning about H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah.
People know about the racism concerning H.P. Lovecraft. Most people, of course, know his cat's name, who will remain unnamed on this podcast.
Hold on, I have to look it up because I don't know what his
You
cat's
don't know
name
what
is.
his cat's name is?
No, I'm looking it up right
man.
now.
That's like the one thing people know. Well, H.P. Lovecraft was a writer from like the 1920s and 30s, so there's an inherent racism that comes with being a white writer in the 1920s. Caitlin's face when she saw the name.
Oh, I knew it was. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But
we don't talk like that anymore, people.
It should be said that, obviously for his time, racism was pretty out in the open, pretty prevalent.
It was normal for the time.
Yeah, how things haven't changed. So, actually, it turns out that he was a little bit more. He put a little stink on those curveballs.
Yeah, I knew being a white man in the 1930s, it was going to be questionable. But, wow, don't meet your heroes.
Yes. Well, if we cut out all of the racist writers, we wouldn't have anything to read, I guess.
That's fair.
Yeah, even some of his, compatriots from the time, even they'll say that, like, he was a little... In H.P. Lovecraft's own words, in his later life, he was a little too racist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he did kind of, later in his life, realize, like, okay, I was a little too racist there. I'm not sure how genuine he was about that, if he wasn't just, like, commenting on it, or if he actually felt bad about some of the things he said.
Let's hope he actually felt bad about it, because that's pretty bad. And if you type in H.P. Lovecraft, one of the top results
is his cat's name.
H.P. Lovecraft's cat name.
That's what I said. Like, everybody knows the cat's name.
I didn't, and now I do.
There's a couple of stories. Racism is a pretty prevalent piece of a lot of his writings, for better or worse. Often it seems for kind of worse. He tends to make the human antagonist of his stories usually dehumanizes them pretty badly in a way that's maybe a little distasteful.
Just a little distasteful.
If you decide to read these stories yourself, and you know what, you should. They're pretty good. Just keep that in mind, that you're going to see this and you're going to see some words.
Yeah, we wanted to forewarn you that when you read this, you're going to be like, oh, the Palmers love this. And then you're going to be like, oh my God, the Palmers are pieces of shit.
Yeah, no, I'm not even a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan. I got friends that are, obviously. I mean, he created a very special, I guess you could call it a universe. It feels kind of overdone to call it a universe. He created his own mythos.
Sure.
And he is a good writer. There's some argument about sort of how good a writer he is. I'm not a writer snob, so I'm not going to sit here and nitpick all the things that he does. He's got a tendency to describe things in a very flowery sort of sense.
Yeah.
His descriptions are very good and detailed, almost scientific sometimes, and which is fair. He had said that he enjoyed science, that he was a fan of science, and a lot of his stories usually take place through the eyes of some sort of scientist or researcher. So it makes sense for them to be described
sure.
in a very scientific sense. Now, when I say for better or worse, I mean, obviously, sometimes that can be a bit dry.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It can be a bit dry. But he does describe things very well. He's got a couple of words that he falls back on and uses a lot. But, yeah, sometimes the right word's just the right word.
Mine is LOL.
That's your... Wait, when you describe things, you use that too
I
much?
just say LOL. That's pretty LOL.
That's pretty cringe. I'm going to remove all of this.
Okay.
No one's going to hear these words.
Oh, yeah.
So, I will recommend, I'll be referencing a few stories while talking about Cthulhu, but I would recommend that you read some of these yourself. A lot of these are short. He did a lot of short stories. He did quite a few longer ones too. The main one we'll be talking about today, which revolves around Cthulhu, is the short story, The Call of Cthulhu.
What?
Yeah, as you could imagine. So don't be like me and type into Google, hey, which stories does Cthulhu show up in? Because Google will autocorrect it and say, oh, which stories is Cthulhu mentioned in?
Right.
These. And then you'll be like, cool, I'll read The Mountain of Madness. It's only 4 hours.
Yep.
And then hear Cthulhu's name said 3 times and realize that you
it's
read
not
the
even
wrong
about
story.
Cthulhu.
So
That was so funny. He's like, I'm researching now. He wasn't even reading the right book.
I wasn't reading even remotely the right book. I say not remotely the right book. The Mountains of Madness does talk about Cthulhu. Like I said, it mentions his names about 3 times. Mainly what the Mountains of Madness does is set up the world of H.P. Lovecraft. And this is where I will say that this episode contains a cognito hazard. And if you make it to the end, you'll understand exactly what I mean by that. The coolest thing that I think that H.P. Lovecraft did with all of this is that he created a world that had people at the time convinced he was talking about real life.
Right.
Like fact.
Yeah.
And that continues today. A lot of people will hear of Cthulhu and think that these cults and these things existed.
Sure.
That he was a piece of actual mythos, and he's not. He's completely fictitious, but
people still...
the method
people will
in
believe
which
what they believe.
H.P. Lovecraft wrote and the sort of conviction and I was pretty impressed by his scientific acumen, the words that he used in all of this. It seemed like he did a lot of studying, I don't know if for the stories or just in general, about the things that he was talking about, because in the Mountains of Madness, it takes place with a group of scientists going to Antarctica to do fossil drillings.
Mm-hmm.
And he references a lot of equipment, a lot of time periods, eras in which these fossils would have, become fossilized.
Mm-hmm.
He uses a lot of scientific lingo, which for the 1920s, you couldn't just Google what these were. You had to own books. So, I mean, he obviously owned some of these books that would be referencing these things.
He was a very learned man.
He was a pretty learned man, at least when it came to this. He at least knew enough to convince a layman in those sort of fields that he knew what he was talking about.
Right.
It sounded like they really were the documentations of scientists doing scientific study. And I think that's partly what convinced a lot of people.
It was like the Blair Witch Project before the Blair Witch Project, where people think it's real, but it's not.
Yeah. So, before I talk about any of the stories, let me tell you about Cthulhu.
Oh, goody.
First of all, the name Cthulhu, which we all pronounced as Cthulhu, is not correct.
Oh,
Cthulhu.
Say it one more time.
Cthulhu.
Nice.
You'll also hear Cthulhu and things like that. But the way that H.P. Lovecraft actually went on record as saying that it's pronounced is more like Kululol or something. It sounds like you're not really saying a word, or maybe that...
Like a deep guttural word.
Like you bit your tongue and it's very swollen. Yeah, no, it is supposed to be a word that is not meant to be spoke by mortal tongue.
Cool.
It is a sound so ancient and alien that the human mouth just can't pronounce it. So I won't be pronouncing... You guys know me, I like to pronounce things the way they are actually supposed to be pronounced. I cannot go through this whole podcast saying "kululul" because you won't know what I'm talking about.
And I'll make fun of him for the rest of our lives.
Right, and I tend to alternate Cthulhu and Cthulhu.
Really? I've always just said Cthulhu.
I kind of like the sound of Cthulhu better.
Really? We had a foster kitten one time I named Cthulhu.
Cthulhu, right?
Yeah, it died.
So, Cthulhu, for those who have never been on the internet, I guess, and never seen him, is described as a large humanoid, aquatic-like creature. To take the quote where he is described in The Call of Cthulhu, it seemed to be a sort of monster, or a symbol representing a monster, of a form which only a diseased fancy could conceive. If I say that my somewhat extravagant imagination yielded simultaneous pictures of an octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature, I shall not be unfaithful to the spirit of the thing. A pulpy, tentacled head surmounted a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings, but it was the general outline of the whole which made it most shockingly frightful. Behind the figure was a vague suggestion of a cyclopean architectural background.
Cyclopean architectural background. What is that?
So, the word cyclopean sort of meaning like
One
giant.
Eye. Oh, okay.
Giant and ancient. He uses cyclopean a lot.
It's one of his words.
That's one of his words. He really likes to use.
Word of the day. Use
But
this word.
it's apt. It just is describing what he's talking about. He's often talking about things that are both ancient and unfathomably large.
Oh, like me.
So that being said, Cthulhu's size is never directly mentioned. Like you don't get like a scale exactly how big is Cthulhu. But in one story, I believe also in The Call of Cthulhu, he is described as basically a mountain that moves.
Dope.
This, of course, rising out of the southwest Pacific Ocean, I believe.
Oh.
So pretty spooky if you're on a boat, especially at night.
Yeah, being on a boat at night is spooky no matter what.
It's just no way around it.
No, thank you.
In the Mountains of Madness, the story I mistakenly read, Lovecraft has a very particular way of writing.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that he is good at is describing a descent into madness.
Right, that's kind of his whole shtick.
Any story that includes that is generally liked more so than others. And it seems like a lot of people like the Mountains of Madness, and I'll give them that the first half of the story is very good. And the second half of the story is not so good. So let me say this. The first half of the story involves, of course, like I said, a group of scientists, mainly a 4-man team, but they've got like 16 assistants, and they got 2 boats full of other crewmen that are staying offshore as they have journeyed down to Antarctica, and this, of course, being set in the 1930s, before any real exploration of Antarctica had been done. And honestly, even to this day, it remains largely unexplored because it's an extremely hostile environment.
It's not compatible with life.
It is not compatible with human life. All of these scientists came from the Miskatonic University, a fictional place that he created for his stories. So you'll often hear that word, Miskatonic, being used a lot too. And often it's usually to kind of describe like that old knowledge that Lovecraft likes to include into all of his things.
Scholarly.
They land on basically a plateau south of the Ross Sea. If you pull up a map of Antarctica, you can kind of figure out where they're going through all of this, because he'll name very real landmarks, and this kind of comes back to how real all of his stories felt, because he would have them set in real places.
Sure.
And then he would add fictional places to it.
So cool.
Especially back in the 1920s and 30s, when you started talking about real places and not completely made up places, people would assume...
Yeah, they assume it's real.
You meant this world that we're in together.
Right now.
Right now, together. He even goes to the point of giving out, like, the longitude and latitude.
Latitude?
Longitude and latitude of the various places that they go, so you can literally pull up a map and track where they are going.
Oh, that's fun. Doesn't look like that anymore, though, I'm sure.
Right. In the story, they left the Baston Harbor at September 2nd, 1930. And, of course, take a several-month-long trip all the way down past South America and finally to Antarctica. They set up shop, as it were. They set up a base in Antarctica, and like I said, they keep a lot of their crewmen aboard the ships. They have several airplanes that they take with them that have been kitted out to carry heavy loads and be able to land and take off in this type of terrain, because they plan on making it a very specific part in Antarctica where they will do some particular drillings, because they believe that this spot holds particular scientific prizes, if you were. I forgot exactly what it was.
Trade in so many science tickets, and you can get. Some
you trade in all their
prizes.
science tickets. I forget exactly what they were looking for in particular, but it was to prove a certain theory.
It was a stuffed Charmander.
Right, they had their hypothesis. At the very beginning of the story is when you get your first sort of candy piece of people losing their mind. There's various atmospheric effects that create a vivid mirage where, quote, distant bergs became the battlements of unimaginable cosmic castles.
Oh, that's eerie.
Yeah.
I like it.
Where basically they see these mountain ranges, and for at least a bit, it appears as though it's some ancient, otherworldly castle in the distance.
Yeah.
And this is
in Antarctica.
In
the
Antarctica.
1930s.
In the 1930s. This is, of course, the first of many references specifically to this castle. That's one that will reoccur. They journey to examine Mount Erebus. Dr. Lake, one of the main 4 dudes of the story, finds a slate with odd markings that are over 200 million years old.
200 million
200 million years old.
Oh, okay, come on now.
Well, that was the problem. There was some discourse between them as they were like, this is impossible.
Yeah.
This has to just be a weird slate with just kind of weird markings. You know, nature creates some weird things sometimes.
Where did they get 200,000 from? 200
200 million?
Yeah.
Based on, like, the fossils that were, like, surrounding the
Oh,
slate
okay,
or whatever.
so it's like a science thing.
Right, yeah. They're like, hey, yo...
This is old as shit.
This is old as hell. Later on, they hear an almost musical wind that physically discomforts them. It's later described as like a howling or a piping.
Ooh. Okay, so far I like it. Go on.
The group splits apart because one scientist wants to really pursue this slate, and he believes that it would take them to like a northwest area, which is kind of the opposite of where they're going. They were headed like more east.
Clay, I'm sorry to interrupt your story, but I just read something about H.P. Lovecraft's cat. You know, the one with the name?
We can't talk about the cat.
Okay, well, we can't say the name, but he would have named that cat when he was about 9.
Damn.
I was just reading. It was like his childhood cat that he had in 2000.
That honestly is kind of a name that I would expect a 9-year-old to come up with. So, a 9-year-old who plays Call of Duty. Yeah, I'd expect that.
Moving on.
The group ends up splitting in two because Dr. Lake wants to investigate this slate further, and he believes that he'll find more evidence or where it came from to the northwest, but the original plan was to head east. So the main protagonist of the story, the narrator of the story, stays behind to work on a few things in preparation for that journey, while he lets Dr. Lake kind of have a little journey to satiate his curiosity.
A little day trip.
He honestly doesn't think that he's going to find anything, but Lake seems very convinced that he will.
It's kind of a just let him do it.
In the course of this, they discover a mountain range that they measure to be approximately 35,000 feet. Now, this is a big deal, because Mount Everest is not that tall.
Okay, I'm like a deer in the headlights, because I'm like, how big
this would
is
be
that
like
big?
4,000 or 3,000 feet taller than Mount Everest.
Oh my goodness, okay.
This is, yeah, so not like twice the size or anything, but still a huge landmark. It's like, hey, we found the new tallest mountain.
Yeah, bigger than the
It was undiscovered here in Antarctica. Of course, the other doctors that stayed behind feel pretty upset that they didn't go with to see this, because, you know, at this point, this is no longer speculation. You know, this isn't like this approximately 200 million year old slate. This is a very real, huge scientific discovery.
He's not crazy old Maurice.
In describing this mountain to the away team, they mention some strange geometry on the side of the mountain. Squared edges with sharp vertical sides, cave mouths of square and semicircular shape. What he's describing are shapes that are typically not found in nature.
Right.
Things that would be man-made, but obviously this can't be true either, because Antarctica became uninhabitable long before mankind ever came around.
Right.
In the process of exploring this area, they also were able to dig down, and they found an underground cave. And this cave was full of fossils. And when I say full of fossils, I mean they basically like found a treasure room full of fossils.
That's so cool.
The way it's described is kind of basically that like every wall is just full of these fossils. Later on in exploring this cave, they discover 14 specimens of indescribable creatures. Now, when I say indescribable, I mean I'm going to describe them now.
Okay, I was going to say, I feel like that's kind of a cheap thing that H.P. Lovecraft did. It's like, it's undescribable. Human eyes aren't supposed to see it.
See, but then he always goes on to describe them as best he can.
Okay, so to be fair, I've never actually read the books.
Yeah. When he says indescribable, he usually follows it up right immediately with
the
a description.
description.
And we joke about that, but it's kind of like, I'm going to describe it as best I can, but this thing is by definition indescribable.
Okay, that's cool. I'm okay with that.
So all he can do is make approximations of what these body pieces are, what these shapes are. The creatures they found were 8 foot long, with membranous wings, starfish-shaped heads, 25 tentacles in all, and muscular arms. Upon closer examination, they seemed to be some sort of mix of vegetative and animal creature.
Where are the tentacles coming from?
Everywhere. They're all over. There's some on the head. There's like some by the arms and stuff. Like they're just kind of. There's a lot of tentacles.
I pictured like tentacle pubes because I'm 12.
Yeah. Well, you know, to be fair, they had a starfish head, but they also had like a smaller appendage towards the bottom that was also starfish shaped.
Oh yeah.
So it had like a head-ass combo that looked the exact same.
Nice.
These head-ass creatures. And then comes a quote that I love deeply, We all seemed to find in it a taint of latent... Fuck.
A taint?
A taint. We found a taint.
Oh, no.
It was 1.5 inches away from its starfish butthole. We all seemed to find in it a taint of latent malignity and infinitely evil portent.
What's a portent?
Like something to come. Okay.
You're welcome, listeners.
Before the team that stayed behind could make it to this first team to see these creatures, this cave, this mountain, the away team was lost in basically a hurricane force ice storm.
Cool.
Now, Antarctica, here in the meat space, not in Lovecraft's setting, is a terrible, terrible place.
Yeah.
And it does routinely have gusts that are like 90 miles an hour. Because there's nothing to stop it. And there's also another phenomenon that has to do with, like, heat and cold fronts and the mixing at the pole.
Well, it's technically a desert, too, isn't it?
Right, yeah. So it creates these massive winds, but they were also just below a mountain, which is another thing that can affect wind speeds drastically. So this hurricane force ice storm kicked up, and the away team was found dead.
Yeah, it fucked their shit.
It fucked their shit right up. They couldn't get out in time, and the shelters they had just were insufficient. And they were described as being, like, pulverized. As if they had been shot with a shotgun, but with ice.
Oh, God. That's awesome.
It's also pretty cool. All the intact strange bodies that they had reported to have found were gone. But the ones that were not intact were still found.
Oh.
So they were able to confirm that these creatures did exist, although they weren't, like, complete. Some were missing parts of their torso or arms or heads, whatever.
They didn't have a full specimen.
Right. The ones that were not intact, that they did find, they did not find as they thought they would find in, like, the research tent or anything like that. Instead, they had been carefully buried upright in 9-foot deep snow graves under 5 pointed mounds punched over with groups of dots exactly like ones found inscribed in the strange greenish soapstone that they had found earlier.
Ooh.
The main consensus was that Dr. Lake's team was assumed to have gone mad, and that they had done this.
Oh.
Now, that is a thing that does happen, and there are stories of that in Antarctic conditions, where people will... it's called paradoxical undressing.
Right, because they think they're hot.
Right, yeah. As well as some other strange behaviors. I mean, typically those stories take place high up in the mountains where the air is thin and people can kind of go crazy.
Sure.
So they believe that they had gone completely mad. The second team was actually censoring their reports back to the mainland for fear of being accused of madness themselves. They were talking about things... Obviously, when they announced that they had found this mountain, great news.
Right.
They found a cave full of fossils, fantastic. Those are all believable things.
Yeah.
But with these creatures...
Hey, the dead things moved and now they're in upright burial positions?
Yeah, they were like, we have to temper this a little bit.
Sure.
And it also came down to the team that was killed in this ice storm. They had censored that a little bit too.
Oh.
Because the bodies had been found to have actually died from lacerations and strangulation. Some were even cut in half, and large portions of their flesh had been removed in a way that seemed deliberate and intelligent.
Ooh.
The intact bodies were missing.
That's so cool.
Quick break to talk to you guys about some things. Caitlin mentioned the Redbubble store, and that's cool and everything, but if you guys have a topic that you would like to hear us cover or suggest that we cover, just send us an email to obsessedwiththepalmers@yahoo.com. I always answer an email, so if you send an email and didn't get some sort of response back, I didn't get your email. That is obsessedwiththepalmers@yahoo.com. We also have a Facebook and a Blue Sky account if you want to follow us there. We post silly images and sometimes talk about what's coming to the show. Particularly on the Blue Sky, I always like to give a hint of what episode is on its way, so long as I know which topic is being covered. Additionally, if you listen to the show through a podcast streaming service, be sure to download the episodes before listening. The quality is better, you don't have to worry about your signal going out, and it gives me valuable listener data to figure out when you're listening to the episodes and where you're listening to the episodes from. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode, and the week after that, a very special Christmas episode for everybody. Enjoy the rest of the episode, and remember, if you hear any maddening whispers, please report immediately to your closest Cthulhu cult for indoctrination. They decided to continue exploring, because in this they found that one man was not present. They could not find his body. Mm-hmm. And one of the dogs was also gone. They had a bunch of they had a bunch of sled dogs.
I'm not okay with that, Clay. You fix that right now. You fix that narrative.
The dogs had reportedly gone crazy.
The dogs were fine.
When these bodies were unearthed. Like, they started barking and snarling, so much so that they had to take them further outside of camp and, like, pin them up.
They took them for a pup cup.
It was found that their cage had actually been destroyed from the inside out, as if the dogs had all together rampaged their way out of their cage.
And they were safely found and rescued.
They were dead.
No.
Except for one that was missing. It should also be mentioned that inside of the specimen tent, they found one person who looked like they had basically been, like, surgically eviscerated.
Ooh.
Parts of his, like, organs and things were taken out and spread out around the tent. When making their report, they did not include who that was, because of how gruesome it was. Mm. They get inside of their airplanes, and the two other doctors, the main narrator being one of them, get inside an airplane and fly over the mountains, where they find a labyrinth of man-affected stone that stretched as far as they could see in all directions. It was as if the mountain was hiding this place. Ooh. It was a wall, and on the other side of that was this expanse of stone that looked like it had been very deliberately carved into buildings. And it extended as far out as they could see in every direction, to the right, to the left, and off into the distance, at least as far as they could see with the sun. Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing about Antarctica is day and night is not as defined as it is elsewhere in the world.
Right.
You will have periods of pretty much entire day and periods of just entire night.
Right.
At this time, they were in a period of extreme day, which is funny, because if I was writing a horror, I would certainly set it in the nighttime aspect.
You would think so, yeah.
But for how H.P. Lovecraft writes, I suppose that the daytime setting is a better fit for his.
Sure.
It allowed them to see. This was a long-abandoned city on a continent that had become uninhabitable many thousands of years before man ever existed. Ooh. They end up landing in a clearing and then journeying into this place to take a closer look at it. Okay. Upon first seeing it, they think, well, this has to be just like the sides of the mountain. This has to just be some weird thing created by nature that makes us think of something man-made. Because, we're looking for patterns.
Sure. Because that's how our brains work.
They find that it is not. Mm-hmm. This is the part of the story where it gets boring.
Oh, no. I was going to say, okay, so far I've been like, maybe I was wrong.
No, so far this is great. It has the same setup, and probably that's what the thing based itself off of, was this kind of thing. Although I believe the thing did base itself on the time in Antarctica when it is mostly night. The second half of this story I could best describe as two old dudes find a long-abandoned city and then read a wiki page that had been carved into the ancient walls. Because that's essentially how it reads. So if you want to find out more about H.P. Lovecraft's setting, read this story and just skip to the second half, because they're going to tell you everything.
Oh.
Yeah, there's no mystery to it. It's just laid out for you. This happened at this time. These beings came down at this time. They interacted with these beings. They died, etc. It's going to give you the entire timeline from basically start to current of how Lovecraft's world was built. And for the time period, I guess that's the best world building you can do, is to just lay it out for somebody.
But see, I'm one of those people, I like it just laid out, because if you leave me with a mystery,
see, but the rest of his writing
mad.
is the opposite of that. He kind of doesn't tell you what's going on. He'll give you these flowery descriptions, but he doesn't ever really lay anything super in stone for you. Whereas the second half of The Mountains of Madness, that's what you get.
Right.
First half of the story, very good horror movie or horror story about, the descent into madness and what is real and what is not. Very, very good. We described Cthulhu as far as how he looks, at least in H.P. Lovecraft's own words, and H.P. Lovecraft did draw a little picture of Cthulhu, and he looks like a gangly, silly little thing. And part of that is because, and in H.P. Lovecraft's own words, he's not meant to be described. We aren't meant to comprehend him. So some people will say that he looks kind of silly, like he's got a little Buddha belly or whatever.
Oh.
He's got these wings that aren't quite big enough to lift something that large.
You see a lot of really cute Cthulhu plushies.
Yeah, and that's like a modern day thing, was over cutifying him, because the idea is that he's something so
Gruesome.
abjectly terrifying
Right.
that it'd make you go insane. And in the Call of Cthulhu, the third part of it, where some sailors discover him, the ones that aren't like killed immediately just from Cthulhu actually killing them with his bare hands, go insane. They see him and they lose their minds. The whole thing that Lovecraft does is sets up a very nihilistic idea of the universe. A world where you are so infinitesimally small that nothing you do, have done, or could ever do will matter.
Oh, that's gross to think about.
And apparently, seeing some of these beings, the mind just can't handle it, and it breaks. And they become lethargically apathetic. And they'll just stand there and die.
Same.
They'll just stand there and die because they're literally like, hey, what's the point?
Oh, same. Mood.
To describe Cthulhu a bit more in depth, I will read yet another quote.
Ooh.
These great old ones, Castro continued, were not composed altogether of flesh and blood. They had shape, for did not this star-fashioned image prove it, but that shape was not made of matter. When the stars were right, they could plunge from world to world through the sky, but when the stars were wrong, they could not live. But although they no longer lived, they would never really die. They all lay in stone houses in their great city of R'lyeh, preserved by the spells of mighty Cthulhu, for a glorious resurrection when the stars and the earth might once more be ready for them. But at the time, some force from outside must serve to liberate their bodies. The spells that preserved them intact likewise prevented them from making an initial move, and they could only lie awake in the dark and think whilst uncounted millions of years rolled by. In that description, he basically describes them sort of like as star stuff. Mm-hmm. Their matter, like their shape, like their minds, are incomprehensible to us. We have a nice little categorization of matter. You've got your solid, your liquid, your gas, and then, plasma, depending on who you're talking to. Mm-hmm. And then these old ones, which Cthulhu is of, are made of some sort of malleable substance that exists between the stars.
Okay.
That being said, it also says that they can never truly die. Mm-hmm. There are times when they are able to exist in our realm, and then there are times when they are not. And for them to awaken from this, they need cultists. Ooh. So a lot of stories you get are about these various cults.
Sure.
And now we have to talk about the racism a little bit more. So when H.P. Lovecraft decided who should be in these cults, mm-hmm. He picked what he considered to be the lesser peoples.
Oh, no.
And he uses that phrase and many others and many other words to describe these peoples. So the antagonists, the human antagonists of the story, are pretty much always non-white peoples. Mm. Any other writer who maybe is less racist might take the time to make a commentary on that in his stories and make that about something bigger. But for Lovecraft, it wasn't. It was just kind of... He had people that he liked to imagine as the bad guy, and he made them the bad guys.
Right.
A lot of what you get with Lovecraft probably wasn't even written by Lovecraft. Lovecraft wrote his stories, and, the Mountains of Madness and the Call of Cthulhu, obviously his stories. But a lot of what we recognize today as the Cthulhu mythos, a term that even he didn't himself coin, a lot of what we read are from other writers. One of which being H.P. Lovecraft's essentially his protege, August William Derleth.
Ooh.
Or maybe Derleth. I liked Derelith more, but I'm probably saying that wrong.
Reminds me of Zoolander, where he's like, it's derelict.
Derelict. He was actually he was the first book publisher of H.P. Lovecraft's writings.
Oh, nice.
So he was the guy that sort of, got him on paper. He would later found the publisher Arkham House, which would not only do the H.P. Lovecraft stuff, but go on to do some other, supernatural, sci-fi-esque.
Because Lovecraft penned Arkham, right?
I believe so. It is hard for me to find out what exactly H.P. Lovecraft did. Maybe there's a chart somewhere that breaks it down for you, but Derelith wasn't the only one of these writers. There was also Robert Bloch, Stephen King. Wait, is it the Stephen King? No, it can't be. Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore.
Ooh, we love Neil Gaiman.
So there were a lot of writers that had to do with the Cthulhu mythos. Mm-hmm. And they added a lot of their own stuff. So there's actually kind of a rift in the fan base that sort of separates specifically derelict stuff from H.P. Lovecraft stuff. Because some of the stuff that he introduced, a lot of people didn't really like. A lot of it comes down to these beings being able to be separated into like the 4 major elements: fire, water, wind, earth, with Cthulhu being a water being, so hence all the very aquatic...
minus the wings.
Yeah, minus the wings, but he's got a big octopus head, and he lives in a sunken city in the Pacific, so he's water. Then you get your other ones that are air and earth and fire. And a lot of people didn't like that. And if they're still around today, they probably don't like Avatar: The Last Airbender either, I guess. So...
Well, there's something wrong with them, because that's the shit. Is it the Necronomicon that summons him?
Well, not necessarily summons him, but the Necronomicon is both a real book and a fake book that H.P. Lovecraft created. So you can get a Necronomicon.
Mm-hmm. I've seen it at the bookstore.
Right. In H.P. Lovecraft stories, it is a ancient book with all of these old god names and creatures inside of it, and of course rituals and all of these things. So it's a real piece in his story that he forms a lot about this things about. And in the Mountains of Madness, they reference the Necronomicon a whole bunch. Mm-hmm. I think they even reference it in the Call of Cthulhu. So I don't know when the first time the Necronomicon is mentioned in his stories, but it becomes a pretty key piece to his stories. Now, the biggest scary thing about Cthulhu, this mountain-sized dragon, human, octopus creature that can make you go mad just by looking upon him. Something made out of star stuff that came from space eons ago that will one day probably destroy Earth and all of its inhabitants.
Sure. What
makes that creature so scary is, one, the not being able to describe it properly. That's an underlying theme to all the monsters that H.P. Lovecraft writes the stories about. But the other thing is that Cthulhu is not necessarily what you would consider this deity, this all-powerful god. He's a priest.
Oh.
He is pretty low on the totem pole.
That's upsetting.
There are gods that are far stronger than Cthulhu. There are gods whose names cannot even be said. There are gods that are so powerful, in fact, that all of reality is their dream. And should they ever awake, everything will cease to exist. Oh. It goes that high. Oh. Cthulhu is nothing.
He's just a baby.
Comparative, to how we are to Cthulhu, he might as well be that to, say, Azathoth, the god that I was describing, the one who, when awakes, will undo all of reality. And when you realize that you're that far down, that you're insignificant to somebody who might as well be insignificant to someone else, that's where he draws all that from. That nihilistic, cosmic horror is what he is known for.
That's dreadful.
Now, we all know of Cthulhu, but a lot of people probably have not heard the name Azathoth. There's a couple of big ones, and honestly, Azathoth is one of the bigger names. But most people that have heard Cthulhu's name know Cthulhu, and that's it.
Sure. That was me, yeah.
He's become sort of the face of H.P. Lovecraft's writings, and, I mean, the whole setting that he's set in is called the Cthulhu mythos. Mm-hmm. It sort of all began with the Call of Cthulhu. That was sort of the story that kicked it all off, so he became the poster child for H.P. Lovecraft. Obviously, there are plenty of other gods. There are ones that are weaker than Cthulhu. He's not necessarily the weakest. You've got gods like Nyarlathotep, who's basically just a asshole.
An actual rectum deity.
An actual rectum. It's hard to find out what is particularly canon and what is not, because there are a lot of fandoms around Cthulhu. So there's a lot of different sources that will talk about like who Cthulhu's like parents are. My favorite listing, though, and I don't know how true this is, but one of his parents is supposed to be Nug. Nug. But yeah, you got Azathoth, you got Yog-Sothoth, you got Yeb. I don't know how to pronounce like this one's particular name, so I won't even try to say it. Never mind. I was gonna try to, but it's spelled Cxaxukluth. So if you can pronounce that, go ahead, have fun with it. I'm happy for you. Not me. That's not for me. And I couldn't even begin to describe you which ones are fire and wind and earth, or if that even matters. H.P. Lovecraft's stories sort of kicked off its own genre of horror writing, which a lot of people refer to as cosmic horror. He was kind of ahead of his time in that, because these weren't the kind of stories that people were telling. He focuses a lot on madness. Like I said, that his stories that include a descent into madness are some of his better stories. The parts where he talks about the descent into madness is where he is strongest as a writer. And where that came from was probably his own life.
Yeah.
His parents were crazy. So
even for the 1930s?
Yeah, like even taking that into account, they were like clinically crazy. His father died from, I think, complications that had to do with syphilis.
Oh, God.
And it was likely
rampant.
that one or both of his parents had schizophrenia, which means that
he probably did too.
Right. So his mother was admitted to a mental hospital. His father died when he was like 3, and his mother was admitted when he was also really young.
Well,
so,
to be fair, though, you could be admitted to an asylum for anything.
Yeah, but no, they're pretty sure that his mom was actually...
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like
not the general, like, oh, hysterical women.
Yeah.
Oh, no, hysterical women. Gotta lock... Yeah, that kind of thing.
Her uterus is traveling.
Her uterus is traveling. Her uterus.
Uterus.
That's a different outer god that we'll speak of later.
It's not.
So his early life was sort of fraught with madness.
Yeah.
And that probably had a lot to do with the things that he chose to write about.
That makes a lot of sense, because if his dad had a Swiss cheese brain, then he probably saw him. That's one of his earliest memories.
Yeah, and like I said, schizophrenia is hereditary. There's a pretty good chance that he had it too.
Sure.
So yeah, not great. Not conducive to a happy family home. He was mainly raised by, I think, his grandparents, and he did a lot of raising of his own siblings too. Being the only male sibling.
Right.
So there's plenty to talk about as far as the setting that Lovecraft set up. The second half of To the Mountains of Madness obviously lays all of that out, and if someone wants us to do that, I guess we could, but we won't do it in this one. Part of my thing with Cthulhu, what has happened to him is kind of upsetting. And this is what I was talking about earlier with the cognito hazard, is that if you know about him, if he's been described to you in length, if you know all of his secrets and what makes him so different, then you've already kind of ruined the story for yourself. The thing that makes the things that H.P. Lovecraft talk about scary is that you don't know anything about them. Doing a deep dive into figuring out where they fit in and all of this, the timelines and this hierarchy of outer gods and all of these things, it takes away that horror. It's the reason why a lot of really good horror movies don't let you see the monster. Mm-hmm. In Jaws, you don't see the shark until the very end.
Sure.
Because the idea that he's out there and that he's pursuing you, that danger exists,
and you can't see it.
But you can't see it, allows your mind to create the scariest possible thing. You imagine the worst.
Sure.
It's just how humans are.
That's how I am.
And with H.P. Lovecraft and Cthulhu, it's much the same.
Yeah. I don't know, though. I like to see the monster.
I like to see the monster, too, but what makes it scarier is not knowing anything about it. It being this unknowable force that is trying to harm you in some way, or even sometimes that just exists in a world where you think you understand and know all these things. The upset that you actually don't know as much as you do is scarier than a big octopus-headed dragon thing.
True.
Any story about Cthulhu wouldn't be complete without, of course, the chant that his cult chants. These magic, ancient words spoken in a tongue that no mortal man was meant to pronounce.
Oh, are we gonna summon Cthulhu?
We're gonna, we'll give our thanks to Cthulhu.
Okay. Everyone bow your heads.
I got to try to pronounce these words.
Oh.
mglw'nafh, Cthulhu R'lyeh, wgah'nagl, fhtagn. In his house at R'lyeh, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. Often shortened to just Cthulhu fhtagn, which basically means like Cthulhu waits.
Ooh.
Because they all do. For countless eons and millions of years, for the stars to align, and for a group of followers whose dreams have been invaded by the shadowy figure of Cthulhu and the other Elder Ones, to call forth and awaken them, so that the end times may come.
Wow.
Wow. You said
like... No, like, wow, like, oh, that's upsetting. That's, is that how we're gonna leave people?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we can rate Cthulhu if you wish.
Yeah, I would like to rate Cthulhu, because I didn't know all these things.
How likely are you to survive an encounter with Cthulhu?
-4.
Yeah, I think 1's as low as you can give it, and I think I'd give it a 1. I mean, he's the size of a mountain, so he could kill me instantly, I guess. And if I behold him, I'll probably go insane, and if I don't, I wish I had.
Right, so it's just bad.
It's just bad.
All of it's bad.
You might not even have to run into Cthulhu for him to have killed you, because his cult might do it. They might sacrifice you to him. Alright, so how spooky would you say Cthulhu is? On the rating scale, of course. Not spooky, spoopy, 2 spooky for me, or 3 spooky, 5 me.
I would give him a solid 2 spooky for me.
2 spooky?
Because it's the idea of him that's scary. Like, Cthulhu, the image of him, I think he's, like, kind of cute.
I think Cthulhu himself is pretty spoopy.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'd give him a 2 spooky. Some might argue that, like, no, he's so scary that it drives you insane. But he's not so scary that it drives you insane. He's just something that's not meant to be comprehended. So he gives you the poo brain when you look at him.
I do be having that poo brain all the time.
How likely is Cthulhu to be real?
Okay, so unless it's like Primals and Final Fantasy,
and
where enough people believe in him and he becomes
That's
real.
a different creature, and we'll talk about that another time.
Yeah, it is. It's true. But I don't believe in Cthulhu. I'm sorry.
You don't believe in Cthulhu?
I don't.
Well, he's not going to bring you presents for Christmas.
Fuck.
I mean, obviously he's fake.
Right.
He is a written fictitious creature.
He's a character, sure.
No matter how convincing that author might have made it, to confuse people. People actually went up to him and was like, "Where did you find this ancient knowledge?" He's like, "Bro, I made it up." So, and like I said, that continues today. So I think he's very believable, but yeah, not real.
Right.
Now, do I think there are some otherworldly beings that
sure.
exist somewhere in the 4th dimension between ours and the next plane of existence? Yeah, maybe. And that's really spooky.
Mm-hmm. That is 3 spooky, 5 me.
Yeah, that's 3 spooky, 5 me for sure. How likely is Cthulhu to be an alien? I'd say a 10 because of the story came from space.
Right, yeah. I'd definitely give it a solid 10.
You know what? Going back to how likely you are to survive with Cthulhu, I should bring this up. I might have to bump myself up to a 2.
Oh, how come?
Because in the Call of Cthulhu, his resurgence is momentarily halted when a boat crashes into his face. So if I've got a boat, if I've got a boat and a head start, I can take down Cthulhu.
I believe in you, honey.
And that's in Lovecraft's own words. Like,
yeah.
He wrote that weakness in there, all right?
You
use a wooden stake to kill a vampire, a boat to kill Cthulhu.
Right. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I meant to bring that up. So I will bump myself up to a 2 on that score.
I'm still giving myself a -4.
That's fair. And yeah, Cthulhu's an alien. I don't know what to say about it. He just is.
You know, Cthulhu straight up is an alien. Like, hi, my name is Cthulhu and I'm an alien.
And with that, that's all I can really tell you about Cthulhu.
summon at your own risk.
Summon at your own risk. If you want to find out more about Cthulhu, you can go peruse those wiki pages if you want. I can't tell you how much of it is true or not. And by true, I mean like written by authentic authors and not some 16-year-old in his bedroom. And with that, I'll leave you with just one word. Tekalili. 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 Editor's note. I found this out after recording and had to include it. So I found out there's no recordings of H.P. Lovecraft's voice, but there is some documentation of people who have heard him publicly speaking or personal friends of his that have described his voice as being high-pitched and nasally.
Oh, like mine. And
with a strong Rhode Island accent. So, H.P. Lovecraft likely sounded just like Peter Griffin.
Oh my god! Oh my god.
Hey, Lois, you remember what my cat's name was?
No!